So yeah, the first thing I think we wanted to talk about today was the latest episode in the Mesut Ozil ongoing controversy, with Toni Kroos coming out and saying that Ozil had it wrong, that there's no racism in the German team.
Saying it was a lot of nonsense. Like he said, there were some parts of it that were true and that had merit, but they were undermined by the significant amount of nonsense that was in his statement.
Yeah, and that's it's the strongest rebuke of Ozil from a current player or anyone in that generation of the German setup. There's been former players and pundits and administrative people who have said things criticising Ozil, but this is the first one that's gone to that length.
I have to say, it's also a really interesting view into really what these players think and what the internal dynamics of the squad could be. I mean, this is a view we don't really get very often of what these players' opinions are, because usually they keep their mouths shut and best case scenario they do their talking on the pitch. But it also gives us insight into like whether there are camps inside of the German national team, like who's close, who's not close. As you mentioned earlier, they're not rumored to be particularly close, Kroos and Ozil.
That's right. They've everything you read, and whether it's true or not, that there are these two different kind of camps within the German team, and there have been for some time. And they've, when you're winning, this isn't really a problem, but when you're losing, then this becomes a focal point. And Kroos and Ozil have never been particularly close, according to most of the reports that you see.
Have there been issues between them?
Nothing that I've heard of before. But it seems like there is this this kind of new generation of German player who have embraced something of a English style lifestyle of being flashy and this kind of thing, like a younger generation thing. And then there's the old guard of your Philipp Lahms and your Schweinsteigers who are not doing that. And so
I don't know, man. Like, I don't really buy that. Like, Schweini is still having his fancy wedding, to a tennis star. It follows a different culture, and I follow Arsenal pretty closely, and I haven't seen much to suggest that Ozil is particularly flashy. Like, he was a Mercedes-Benz brand ambassador, so he was driving the latest Mercedes, but beyond that, I didn't really see too much crazy stuff. And he loves sneakers, and he's got like his little logo all over his house and stuff. But I don't know. I mean, there could be something to it. Like I said, this is an interesting insight. I don't really need to know a ton about it.
I think for me, it's like it's a bit. Of course, there's the issue of if Toni Kroos comes out and says there is no racism, well, I mean, he's a guy that probably hasn't had to face it very much, as opposed to a Turkish German. But the other thing is that nothing in Ozil's letter, and you can criticize it, and it has been criticized legitimately, but he doesn't say that he ever experienced it from the team itself.
Right.
And he identifies a couple of people within the DFB makeup who he says he's seen racist conduct from, but he doesn't actually say that the team is racist, and that seems to be the focus of Toni Kroos' statement, which is kind of it misses the point. It's this kind of not all men hashtag thing that you see.
Yeah, exactly. Like that was kind of the shame in it. I don't think so. Ozil said that he felt racism, and he singled out one guy, and that was Grindel. And I think it was really in not poor taste, but it was poor judgment for Ozil to come out and say, to use the R word, because the R word is like, that's a top card. Like, you pull that card when you're 100% sure that's when what's in somebody's heart. And so, like, we don't know what happened behind the scenes, but to come out with a very broad-based indictment, that's exactly what Ozil didn't do. He said that he felt it a lot from some quarters of society and from from in some ways from Grindel and from the DFB as well.
I'm sure there's no doubt that it exists in every country that plays football, unfortunately. And there have been prominent politicians and prominent people outside the German football setup who have criticised integration and all this kind of stuff. And so it does exist to some point, but that wasn't exactly what Toni Kroos was addressing.
Why do you think that? I mean, also Manuel Neuer gave an interview as well, where he said that like the entire issue was not good for the national team, and so basically confirming what Bierhoff said. I mean, Bierhoff said something very different. He said something specifically to the lines of maybe it would have been better to leave Ozil behind, which is very squarely pinning some blame on Ozil. But Neuer said like the entire issue was not good for the preparations and not good for their performance at the World Cup. But didn't necessarily put the fault at the feet of Ozil, and actually pretty squarely mentioned the media and how the media really strung this out. But given the fact that Neuer spoke out about it, Kroos spoke out about it now, when neither of them really had to, like regardless of how they felt, like gives some insight that actually like there's no consensus inside the squad, and maybe there were camps, and maybe they weren't as unified as we maybe we've been led to believe.
For sure. And I don't know the context in which Toni Kroos was asked about it and why it's taken him a few weeks to talk about it. So it could just have been an offhand comment that if he was asked at a press conference, I mean, this isn't something that I've seen reported, so that's important as well. But obviously he's thought it's important enough that he needs to speak about it now, and to come out with such a strong statement about this is how it is and everything else is ridiculous or silly or whatever he said. I think it shows you how important that is to him, and that there is but again, I think it's missing the point. I think it's his statement is not really disputed from what Ozil has said, and he never said he'd faced any degree of racism in the team, and he didn't even mention that there were two camps within the team and all this kind of stuff, which is what other people have said. And Toni Kroos kind of came out and made that point as well, but that's not exactly
essentially, like from what I understood, Ozil's beef was that he was insufficiently protected by the DFB, like that the decisions they came up with in terms of not releasing a statement was a mutual one, that he was cooperative, and that essentially for Grindel, the way that Grindel handled himself was really, self-serving and not particularly understanding. There's a politician who has his subjective views on things, and instead of focusing on the mission as president of the German Football Federation to really bring the team together, to create the right environment for the team to be successful at the World Cup, insisted on pushing his own views forward, which maybe like like a lot of society agrees with, but that wasn't the forum. I don't think that the majority of Germans would say that multiculturalism is a myth, but like that just wasn't the forum. And then secondly, that a lot of the blame for the World Cup, that disaster, was laid at his feet, and the German Football Federation shouldn't have been issuing statements like maybe we should have let Ozil behind. And he feels a lot of racism. It's given cover to a lot of racists, frankly, to come out of the woodwork. In some measures, the racially tinged rhetoric in the media, as well as from fans and from just the public at large. And so I think Toni Kroos, that's what he misses out on. I think he is looking at the immediate environment of, did anybody in the German Football Federation treat Ozil in a racist way? Does anybody in his team treat him racist? But I think once you start using the R word and rhetorically, it's a really difficult and tricky thing. For example, just to highlight some of the divisions in the squad, I think that I saw Boateng congratulating Ozil on his retirement and having a fantastic career, which a lot of the other German national team players didn't do. I think a couple others, maybe Sané did it as well. Maybe Emre Can. I don't remember exactly, but there was a good amount of players who had something to say on Twitter, just positive things. But I thought the silence was pretty deafening.
Yeah. I mean, and that then plays into this idea that there could be two competing camps. Again, if they had have progressed to the quarterfinals, which wasn't that out of the question, considering how unlucky they were in these games. Not to say that they deserve to, and not to relitigate, but then probably wouldn't be having these discussions. It's just that this historic elimination has brought up everyone's favourite fall guy, who's Ozil. And if you look at the papers on Monday morning after the Chelsea Arsenal game and watching the coverage of that, it was all Ozil's fault again. And it's this. And in
this case, I would say Ozil is poor, or Ozil did play poorly. I think he had 17 passes all game, which is pretty ridiculous considering he's on £350,000 a week. And I don't know. I think it's also Ozil is his own type of player, and if any player needs time to acclimate to a new coach's philosophy, I think he's amongst them. But I think you got to call a spade, and you can't just be pro Ozil or anti Ozil. He's a human being. He has good games and he has bad games. I mean, this happens to be way out of the orbit of what you expect a normal football players to experience or go through. I would argue also largely of his own creation, because he chose to step into some controversial waters. But I do think he has a point. To me, Toni Kroos and Manuel Neuer seem a little bit more out of touch. Toni Kroos more, just because he went far enough to call some of Ozil's comments Quatsch, which means nonsense in German. I think that's more biting than it need to be if you were to comment at all, which I don't think he really needs to.